a lot of learning things from living in a house that you've built yourself, right? And so part of it is the maintenance cycle, which I am loath to project onto any client now. It's like, let's try to do it once and do it right. There's no such thing as no maintenance, but low maintenance all day long. It means you need to pay more now, so you don't pay more later, because paying more later means you're going to suffer as well.
Yeah.
So let's kill the suffering if we can.
Hello, and welcome to Architecture, Design, and Photography. Today we are speaking with Will Winkelman. I could go to his About page and read a bunch of stuff about him, but you don't really need to do that. He's one of the best architects in the state of Maine. Top 5 to 10, no doubt, in my opinion. I really enjoyed talking with Will. It was really nice to get to know him more than in the professional manner that I've always interacted with him. And just go to his website, follow him on Instagram. They have incredible projects. He's had an incredible time and history here in Maine, and he's from Memphis, I think, originally. So it's a really interesting conversation, and he's an incredibly talented designer. So welcome, Will Winkelman, to Architecture, Design, and Photography. Welcome to Architecture, Design, and Photography. We have Will Winkelman with us today. In my opinion, one of the best architects in the state of Maine, hands down, easy in my opinion. And I'll just say one of the best so I don't offend other clients. So. But thank you so much for coming all the way down to Biddeford. From your commute involves a boat and a car to get here, which is pretty cool.
Indeed.
You are an islander, which there's been a couple times I've actually been coming back on the ferry and seen you coming off, and I just noticed you as you're going by. I'm like, Will! But you, like twice now I've done it, and I think you're in thought mode and just processing, and you have like the 1,000-yard stare, and I'm like, yeah, he's thinking.
No, that's my bubble. Then my wife says I project. A lot of people think I'm either not nice or mean or something, and that's actually my way of defending.
Are you pretty introverted?
Yeah, I'm seriously introverted.
So this kind of thing, fine, but put you in a group of people and with a drink in your hand to try and
It's a double
socialize.
negative. You do interviews with CEO types, and they'll say they're introverted, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know where that all comes from, because there's some confidence and intelligence that bubbles out and goes in the world. So I don't quite get how that works, but I appreciate that the island and the ferry is good for me, because it forces me to be with people, whereas otherwise I would retreat to the woods and I probably wouldn't be that happy. But it's my inner self is to...
Now, what's the most difficult part about living on an island? I've lived there since 85, so a very long time. The most difficult part is dealing with the ferry. Yeah, it's just now it's the people. It's change and accepting change, because when we moved there a long time ago, it was very, very different, and it keeps changing and we're like, oh, we need to leave and go find something else. And you've been to my house, and I can't recreate that. No, it's super unique, and commuting on the ferry is super unique. And I'm down the street from my office, which is on the water. I love your office location, by the way. Yeah, so I don't know how to. I'm an exceedingly blessed person in that regard. So I shouldn't change a thing because nothing's broken. Now, where are you from? Are you from Maine originally? Or?
I'm from Memphis, Tennessee.
Really?
I had a Southern accent for a very long time.
Really? Southern gentleman. Look at that.
Gentleman. I was just a child, really. I used to say can't.
I can't do that right now.
English is a second language for me. I don't have a first language. I draw, fine, great. I just don't say things correctly.
From Tennessee, how'd you end up in Maine?
Women.
Yeah. That's most of the reason.
I drove around the country with a girlfriend when I was a child in the 20s, and had taken a leave of absence from a job in an architecture office in San Francisco, doing big buildings and not enjoying it at all. And drove around the country, drove through Maine. Neither of us had any connection whatsoever with Maine. Thought, this is cool. This is in 84, right? Yeah. So it was a while ago.
How old were you in 84?
84, I'm 63, so I was born in 58. 27,
Okay,
26.
So,
So
you're in your 20s.
yeah, that's that. You're out of college for a couple of years, and you're trying to figure out what you want to do and what you love.
Very similar to the age that I moved here at. I was 25, so
Yeah.
a little sooner, but yeah.
Yeah, and I was a Southern boy. I'm from the South. I went to school in Houston, and I just met with a prospective client yesterday who described themselves as a climate refugee.
Oh yeah,
and self-admittedly relocating or a retreat in Maine from Atlanta.
Yeah,
and it's like I can't do heat. I never could. I just despise it. You go indoors and air conditioning just
you or your client?
Me.
Yeah.
And so I was in San Francisco for 2 years, and I'd still be there because I love the North Coast.
Yeah.
But she was like, "Hey, let's move," and I was sure. And so we drove through Maine. We had dinner one night at the baker's table, which you may not go back that far, across the street from where Evo is now. And one dinner, saw a guy at the restaurant, and he said Higgins Beach is a great winter rental place. And so
I rented on the beach too my first year here, except in Biddeford Pool area.
What year?
It would have been 2003. We got an apartment on Main Street here in Biddeford, and when the Harleys would go by, the noise would bounce off the street walls into our apartment.
Yeah.
And I'd surf out on Fortune Rocks area, and I was like, I bet these places are empty, and some of them might rent through the winter. So I started looking in the newspaper at the time because we didn't really have a very highly developed internet at the time.
Yep.
And I found a place. We had this little roundhouse, and so we spent 9 months just right on the beach and in the dead of winter. It was really cool.
Isn't it cool?
Yeah.
A winter beach is fascinating.
Yeah, it's just so
layers of frozen ice,
but it can be so sunny and bright, and then but so frigid at the same time, and so quiet. And just so harsh but beautiful.
Yeah, I think part of our concept, my girlfriend and I in the time, was like, if there's a state that's nickname is vacation land, why wouldn't you want to live there all the time?
Right.
So it's learning to live with winter and all that, and it's all good.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, it stuck.
So your house, I remember going to your house, and you had started essentially with a shed. You must have bought property out on an island, and then you said, all right, we're going to live out of a shed first. How long were you able to make it in the shed before you went to house?
So as a youth in my mid-20s, my wife and I had a friend who died of AIDS, and our learning from that was, if you have a dream, live it now. Do it.
Yeah.
And so I always wanted to live on the water and build my own house, blah, blah. Didn't have a lot of money. So we managed to buy the piece of land that you've been to, which is just a little more than an acre, but it's adjacent to a wetland. And so it's a very unique piece where you don't have to be a millionaire to get started there, but it's an expansive property. It's not a neighborhood house.
Yeah.
It's in feeling, and in that area, you're in the wild, which is where my true self is. And so it threads that needle. And so we managed to secure the land, and that was in the late 80s. And we built the one-room building out back on the land, and we didn't have money. So working a full-time job and building on the weekends, and it took 7 years to build the house.
So you built the house with your hands, essentially.
Yeah.
The main house.
Yeah. Wow. And what was really cool as an architect is I'd started doing residential design, but it was always quite abstract, right? Because as an architect, we draw, we sketch, we go talk, but we don't do the hands-on thing. No. And I found, because one of the subtexts here is, I found my passion as an architect. I have a brother who's an architect, so that's my male role model. He's
older brother,
17 years my senior.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so he worked with HOK. He was healthcare, so he was all uppercase architect.
We interviewed someone from HOK. Who's one of the founding?
Well, Helmuth, Obata, Kasabam. Obata's the one who was the longest dwelling one. So it may have been Abada.
No, there's a third guy. Wasn't there? I'd have to look it up.
Yeah. Don't know. Anyway, so that's why I went into architecture school out of high school. So I've always been on that path, but I didn't feel passion or confidence in it until I was in my 30s.
Really?
Yeah, it took a while.
Like you're an incredibly well-recognized architect in the state of Maine that does incredible work, and it's very interesting to hear. Like, man, I wasn't that into it until my 30s.
And part of it is I work in one domain.
Yeah.
So it's so tempting for architects to. There's a commission, yeah, and then you figure it out.
Right.
And is it healthcare? Is it restaurants? Is it retail? Is it residential? Is it different kinds of residential?
Right.
And my personal take on it is you end up doing a lot of things kind of half well instead of doing one thing really well.
Right.
And my passion is to be really confident in my domain.
Right.
And I didn't find my passion in architecture until I was working for people instead of entities. So working for TD Bank or Trent Bell Photography or whatever entity, it's commercial work. It's like, yeah, I'll work on a percentage basis. I'll try to make money off of it.
Right.
And hopefully I'll have some creativity and engagement in it. But 5 years from now, you might wipe it all out and do something different. And I may not really know how the codes should roll for the fire sprinkling and whatever else. I didn't like being party to always having to figure it out and only knowing just enough to get it done.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so building my own house, it was twofold. That was in the 90s. One is I'd been on the island long enough that I started doing residential work with clients and at the office I was at. And I felt so different in terms of my engagement because I'm working for you. I'm personally responsible to you. It's not TD Bank who it's like, screw you.
Right.
It's personal. I'm a pleaser by nature.
Right.
And
I wonder if that's a reflection of introversion, where you like to connect to an individual more so than a group.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
an interesting take.
My comfort zone is here and not in there.
Well, you can get down to what really matters when it's two conscious eyes, you know, like your take, my take, your take, my take, rather than my take, we'll take it to committee and get back to you. It's an odd thing.
Yep. So I found my passion in residential work and in particular custom single family resident, not condos, not multifamily, which is again gets into the spec world and value engineering and all that. So that was in my 30s in there. And then building my own house was like the other half of, I found my passion and then I love building. Your body can't take it for a lifetime. I have one carpenter I'm working with who's 71 and I have so much respect for him.
Wow.
And he's like in shape and he works all winter long outside and it's like he's a god.
I think us office pencil pushers, like we lose it or something.
Oh, we do. Totally. Yeah. And I'm 63.
We bought land and built the house. I didn't build the house, but we cleared probably 60% of the land completely ourselves.
Yes.
And like now one knuckle's a lot bigger than the other because I was pulling little pine trees out constantly. And I'm just like, I couldn't do this.
Yeah.
The ability to provide for myself through my own physical body would run out pretty quick here if this is what I had to do.
So I was between like 27 and 35 or 40 physically building the house on the weekends and all that. And so that was, my body was like, that was my best shape I was ever been in, right? And I don't have it in me again. I'd love to, and I dive in on the weekends and then there's regret on Monday. But
just stick to furniture or something.
You know, or going, hey, 24-year-old child, will you help with this?
Right.
So it's hard to, the body's a hard thing. But when I was in my 30s, I was soaking it up. I learned how to frame and square a wall. My first one was a real education, and my last one was like flowing water.
Right.
It was really satisfying. And I built my kitchen and built windows and all that stuff, shingled it, and we had someone do some drywall and some of the interior finishing. But so it was a really good education about when a 1/4 inch matters, when it doesn't, you know, and
when's it not matter?
Concrete work. There are all sorts of so many really awesome carpenters make things too tight. Things swell, things sag. It's like things fetch up if it's too perfect.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of relaxing that happens there.
Right.
You know, we build a lot of furniture, quote unquote, that's a dwelling, right? It's a really crafted, beautiful piece. And you gotta be smart about how fine you make absolutely everything.
See, there's two thoughts from you saying that. There's when a 1/4 inch matters and when it doesn't. That's very similar to that prayer, like, help me to have the wisdom to know what to change and what I can't change. Also, I remember sitting in a church at one point and looking at the joinery of things and thinking, like, if you make the joint tight, perfect, and like rigid, it's gonna break apart because that's not reality. And the really good joinery is the ones that can allow for breathing and movement and everything else, but still be secure, right? It accepts reality in the best version that it can make of it. And there's also a saying that I just read the other day about, like, if you purify the pond, the lilies die. It's kind of the same thing. You know, like, if you want to go to perfection, you're going to miss all the things that make this real, you know? And so when you said that, it caught like several other memories and thoughts.
Yeah, that's cool. So one interesting thought I wanted to bring to this conversation and kind of thinking about doing this is we just finished renovating our house.
Yeah.
So
and we were talking about this earlier, and to me it's really interesting because you had late 20s and 30s to 40s Will making an abode, and now you've revisited it, and that's such an interesting take.
So the house was designed in 88. I moved to Maine in 84, 85. I'm in my late 20s, and we were in, my wife and I, and who I'm still with, is just great relationship. So I'm very fortunate. She's a New Englander, so that's why I stayed in New England, didn't go back to Northern California. We were both enchanted with inherent island vernacular, building nomenclature, that were cottagey feeling, you know, John Calvin Stevens, all that stuff. And so the house that I designed, or we designed in the 80s, was very reflective of that. It's a unique response to the site, and 4-story tower and all that stuff. But its skin and the character that it reads is very traditional. Very traditional. It also was built with little money, and so materials there are 5 different brands of windows, and you know, so there was a certain quality level that we couldn't afford to up on materials. And I've lived with our leaks for years. My wife has suffered the leaks too. And a lot of learning things from living in a house that you've built yourself, right? And so part of it is the maintenance cycle, which I am loath to project onto any client now. It's like, let's try to do it once and do it right. There's no such thing as no maintenance, but low maintenance all day long. It means you need to pay more now, so you don't pay more later, because paying more later means you're going to suffer as well.
Yeah.
So let's kill the suffering if we can.
Unfortunately, I've already built my house before this conversation, but what are the keys to low maintenance, if there's like a top 5, if that's possible?
It's the material set, and it's the envelope of the building. And obviously, in this day and age, we want to be highly sustainable in terms of how we build a building and its energy performance. And hopefully that's barely something you talk about. It's just what you do. It's not rocket science. So you learn various wall assemblies, and that's where you go. It's the actual skin materials that windows, trim, roofing, siding, concrete work, drainage. So I got to experiment on myself because I couldn't get clients to kind of have fun. I wasn't daring enough to do it with clients. I did a wood roof.
Oh yeah.
A wood board roof. So my house is a tower, and it's a traditional form. It's gables. So I used boards that go up and across and back down and back down. So it's a sculptural form rather than a house with an even rake and a roof and a wall.
Right.
It interjects. This is one of my favorite words in architecture, which is an odd one. Ambivalence in how it reads. Okay. So I do a lot of these planted roofs.
Angle of repose is another good one.
Oh,
it's not angle of repose.
Oh, yeah.
It's not
right.
It's not as much an architectural term, but when you, for those listening, when you pour out sand or dirt or whatever, the angle that it settles at is its angle of repose. So a high angle of repose has a lot of connectivity between the parts in it.
Yeah.
Where a low, like water has a pretty low angle of repose, where sand will have, and then dirt, different. Just background.
For me, sort of the ambiguity piece is when you look at it, it's not just a house.
Right. There's more.
It's and then where my inner self takes it, and this isn't always where I go, because if you're the client, you're part of the seed of the design, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you say, hey, Will, do what comes most natural, then it melts into nature. And so I bring nature onto the building, and it's like, this is where mankind is not dominant to nature.
Mm-hmm.
Man is of and subordinate to nature. That's my true self. So it's like, if I can bury a building plant it, and the field hops up on it, like the Down East Coastal one that we did. You photographed it, like that.
That one just got sold, I think.
He put it on the market.
Yeah.
COVID opportunities.
Oh, opportunity. Yeah. Okay. Because that was such an amazing place.
Yeah. And that was like, the field hops up, and the field is wild. It's not curated on the roof.
Oh, so
and
nice.
That's my comfort zone. And so, and to me, again, I'll go back to one of my favorite photographs on that project is on the roof of a skylight.
Yeah, where the skylight.
So it's there, like the photograph is in a field, but there's a skylight in the middle of the field.
Right.
That's daylighting the kitchen and walking area. And then you see some buildings sitting on top of this. It's like, that's what draws me frequently. So to bring that back to my house, so I'm getting to play with that again at home.
In the renovation of it.
In the renovation. So we're doing a couple planting elements, and I'll throw in a fun one that ties in, actually. Have you heard of an artist named Huntewasser? Frederick Huntewasser?
Yeah. Underwater is what I always like. Is that what they're saying in whatever tongue this guy lives
Austrian.
in? Yeah, Austrian.
He's
like
Austrian.
Huntewasser.
So I discovered him when I was in college.
Yeah.
And, I don't know if you're familiar with his work.
No, I've heard the name, and I can't bring up visual right now. But
So it actually ties in. His work is really from the 60s and 70s, maybe 80s, 90s, I guess, 60s, 70s. And he's kind of a hippie, really, and does experiential art, really. But he does two-dimensional pieces that are almost repetitively a vegetative spiral, the infinite of the universe and nature being expressed in that is very Buddhist kind of thing. And he uses very beautiful colors and foils in this, so it's very luminous, always on a black background. But then it always has an architectural edge. And it's like windowing and building forms that kind of grow into these sometimes. And so I discovered this when I was in college, and then I found some books, art books about him over the years. And he had a lot of architectural manifestos. That was these models that weren't all that sophisticated, but this is the 70s, and you're using little AstroTurf, like HO scale train model sets, right? But it's
I love that you actually know that, like, there's an HO and my son is all into those. And so I get a lot of time looking through the catalogs. He's like, no, this is H scale, and this is O scale, and this is HO scale. Sorry.
That dated myself too. Anyway, he had a lot of proposals for nature dominating architecture. And so we had models of a gas station that's dug into a hill, so that the hillside is like this double negative containing a petroleum station. And then he had a lot of experiential art things where he would, like, in the city in Austria, Vienna, I guess, trees would be planted coming out a window. And so a lot of it's making a statement.
Right.
But it was very influential for me, and I really loved it. And one other tangent that comes back in is I was going through cleaning up boxes recently and found a college booklet I put together as a project for a class that was called Roofs Are for People. And it was all about, like, planting roofs. And so it's like, this is nature and buildings are like at my essence.
Right.
Instead of buildings being strong, hard objects. I'll do a symmetric building, but that's not really what a building wants to be in my mind. So Hundertwasser did all these sort of ambiguity where there's a tree coming out a window. So now back to my house and having renovated it, we reshingled part of it, couldn't afford to do the whole thing, so we've now stained it black. Windows are black, so it's very traditional form that's blends into the trees. So it's very kind of a little quite different in terms of how it works. And then a piece that you might be able to relate to, I talked my wife into letting me bring the black into a porch, screened porch. Okay, so the black is the walls. Well, it has a board ceiling, and so I did a black boarded ceiling as well. In a screened porch that's open on one side and a return wall. And it's like being inside a camera. Okay? Think of the light, the light control box. Yeah. You're in a negative.
Right.
And it frames nature, because we have this beautiful site. Yeah. You've seen that the ocean and the wetland. And so it projects you into, and it's not about the space and the materiality of the space.
Yeah.
It's about the place you're in. So
it
was a really fascinating learning moment, getting to experiment at home.
Now, what is the emotion as you sit in that space? Does it direct your attention far more because of the surround framing?
It's negative. You're in a negative.
Yeah.
And so it's a really interesting, just conceptual thing. I don't know if I would do it to a client or to what extent I would. They would need to come sit in the room, because there's a ratio probably of open area to black that you've got to regulate.
Right.
But or if it was a really tall ceiling. Mm-hmm. But it was a fascinating learning moment of a very successful
now, how's your wife feel about it?
I think she really likes it.
You think?
Yeah. I got away with a few things. So because I did the wood roof.
Yeah.
Right. And so back to my wood roof. So traditional New England form that was built in the 90s and designed to be island vernacular. So now I've grown up as an architect, and I'm much more sculptural in the way I want to create dwellings, rather than it being eaves and rakes and roof and wall. This is a little bit maybe inspired by shingle style, which I was fascinated with in my 20s and 30s. And I still do work like that, where it's the true shingle style is roofs and walls are all the same. It's shingle bombed.
Oh,
okay. There's no even rake. If you really go old school, it's organic form.
Right.
Now I'll get Hundertwasser and kind of just sort of, it's an amorphous form. So it's not a wall, it's not a roof, it's sculpture.
Now, side question. I had quite an RFP, but an inquiry about a job in New Zealand where an artist had done some kind of village or something like that was and I'm wondering if it was Hundertwasser. Because it all sounds very familiar, but this was like probably 6-7 years ago. I was very excited. I was like, whoa, New Zealand, that'd be great. But I don't know if now I want to go back and look up who it was, because I remember it being an artist that like built a very small, not development, but kind of a art community or something. And it was very much like you're saying, a very organic shingle style thing was happening there. And it looked like Austria on acid.
Yeah.
So
cool. Send me a link.
I'll have to find
it. Yeah. Yeah, Google those words and see what you get.
Austria on acid. I'll send you the link.
Yeah, send me that link. So where I tend to take things, again, maybe this is my ambivalence in how pieces of architecture get expressed, is it's not straightforward. There's not your typical gable and even rake and window detail. And so it's applying some think different to my single domain that I want to own and know really well, single family residential architecture, and do a broad range of work type. But again, my comfort zone is stuff that's kind of like, oh, is that a house?
Right.
Is that a cave? Is that, you look through it but there's a space in the middle where people live. So in getting to play at home and experiment on myself, I did this board roof. And so that's all good and cool. I had to detail it so that it's New England water and rain and all that stuff, right?
Of the highest standard, these
the
areas.
highest standard. And now I've learned from having built inexpensively 30 years ago, 20 years, 25 years ago. And so I want it to be, I'll use the word no maintenance, because I'm not going to go out there again. It's 4 floors up, right? I can't get there. Had to buy a man lift to work on my house for a year.
Yeah.
It's on an island. It takes a year. And so I used a wood called Caboni.
I've heard of that.
Yeah. So
really dense wood.
Akoya is another brand and
Okay.
another version. There's another one still. There's some are torfied, but this Caboni, several of these, it's a New Zealand plantation grown, ready out of pine. That is then treated with it was a treatment that was come up with. Furiatic acid is used. The remnant of corn of sugar cane.
Oh, okay.
Byproduct.
Kind of like.
And so it's an organic treatment. It's Scandinavian, and the wood is dark brown. It looks like Ipe. When you get it, it'll weather gray. And it's plantation grown, so it's FSC certified. It's what we should be using instead of Ipe.
Yeah.
And it has a 30-year rot warranty.
Oh, wow.
But it's pine. So I was comfortable putting it on my roof in the most harsh, where I live, it's like wind-driven rain and sun, and then it's as bad as it gets. It ought to be an ASTM lab test, right? So detailed it as rigorously as possible. Had a wonderful time. I was kind of joking to myself coming today. It's like, so what hasn't been talked about? Right?
Wood roofs.
Everything's sure. Wood roof had that. Not talking. Yeah, that's good. To me, because my biggest learning pieces from working on my house were the importance of daylight with clients. Daylight. They buy for view, but daylight is what's most important. So you need to get those two working together.
Yeah.
And having being home 24/7 for the last year, I built a home office that I don't want to leave. Right.
Did you build out in the shed, or did you build a standalone new
24-year-old kid? He got kicked out. So I'm in his room. Turns out he had an awesome bedroom. All he had to do is make a bay window and a bunch of skylights. Right. So
does he want to stay on island?
Oh, he'd like to inherit the house, but no, he doesn't want anything to do with the island. Yeah.
It's always interesting to me.
And not architecture either.
Really?
Yeah, we tinker together, and he's a very good builder and learning to work with his hands. I love watching him learn what I learned in terms of building. But it's chainsaw carpentry is what I do. That's what I do well.
Yeah, it's interesting for me to see the difference between like myself and my oldest son, who he's really engineering mechanical.
How old is he?
He's 12.
Yeah.
And then my youngest son is extremely conscientiously minded. If he knows he needs to do something, there's no question, you do it. And that goes for his own diet, exercise, you name it.
Yeah.
But like for my oldest son, when it comes to surfing, he's far more like, well, and he can verbalize it. He can say, that makes me a little uncomfortable to go out there when it's big. So I'm just going to play in the sand for a bit. You guys have fun, which is way more emotional awareness and verbalization than a 12-year-old should have.
Yes.
But he's just like, yeah, no, I'm a little uncomfortable with that. All right, good. Okay, that's great. But my youngest is just like, do you not have fear? What's going on here? And but then the older is far more kind of open and tinkering and in exploratory, and then the younger is far more exacting, knows what he needs to do and he does it kind of thing. It's so interesting to see how far apples fall from the tree in different ways, you know.
Have you heard of Maker Faire?
Sounds familiar, but I can't
You should Google it.
Yeah.
With my kid when he was young, it started in San Francisco back 20 years ago maybe, and it's tinkerers, and so it's nerdy engineers. What do they do at night?
Oh,
you know, the hack things.
Yeah,
it's a hack fest. And
there's so much stuff on YouTube now of people who make gobzillions of dollars doing that kind of stuff.
But this is going where they're doing it.
Really?
You're not looking at it online. And so it's a whole fair of all these people are hacking things.
Oh, it's like a county fair, but it's for that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Ooh. And it was in San Francisco originally now, and it spread all over the country. And so then we'd go to the one in New York. And I don't know what's happened since COVID. But anyway, for a kid that age, it's fantastic.
Now
engineering, thinking, you know, computery kind of.
So here's a plug for a sponsor. KiwiCo, have you heard of them?
No.
They make these like once a month. I get a box that has these 2 different crates in it, and the one's a tinker crate and one's another like age appropriate. And it's these art, science, engineering projects that they get to assemble. And like Simon just put one together yesterday, and it's like mechanically you put together, and it's with like thin Baltic birch laser cutouts. You know, they're kind of disposable to a degree, but all environmentally friendly. Blah blah blah. But he like got this bird that you do a crank and it shows how a bird's wings actually do it, you know? And it is just really cool stuff like that. And my youngest son I noticed there was all these little small like Dixie cups and this blue ball that would fit in there. And he hadn't read the directions yet. And so I knew what was going on. And so I did the like 3 cups and the ball under one. And you just squeeze the cup when you pick it up. And it looks like it's not in there because it doesn't drop down. And I had him for about 30 seconds. He was just like, oh, Dad knows magic, you know? And
yeah,
it was fun for 30 seconds. So,
but so to tie my traditional house that's become more modern, and more sculptural and less housey, I've got this 4-story tower and it's got 3 little corner decks. So my Hunterwasser moment is I want to plant a tree in one of the corner decks, and then plant some viney things to may drape over and be kind of low because I don't want to block the view, and some rose hips or I don't know what, but I'm going to get some help with what those things are. But there's the view of the house you get from a distance, and you look and you see this 4-story tower above the trees, and then to have a tree popping up out of it and grasses. I love the contradiction. And then when you're inside, you're in the trees, you're elevated, but you're seeing ground plane character.
Okay.
And so that's part of what I'm kind of drawn to is that kind of character and feel.
So it's interesting to me to be able to work for and talk with so many of you guys, architects.
Yeah.
Architects have such an incredibly difficult business model, in my opinion, and potentially such a difficult work environment. In my opinion, the ability to stay on a project for an extended amount of time, for me, that's really difficult work. And to do it in the way that you do it, and the deliverable for you is just a stack of papers.
Right.
And it's like, really, it took you this long to draw these? I'm not going to pay you that.
Yeah, right.
The business model is very hard, but there's so much, you know, it's like kind of saying it took you this long to type this novel. Yeah. It's obviously it's not that.
Yeah.
But what if someone were to describe Will Winkelman to someone else, in your opinion, how would they describe you?
The last thing it is a pile of paper, because it's where you have to be hands-on and engaged with the builder. I used to think that we could draw and you pass the drawings off, and it's like I could go to Florida and they connect the dots and that's it.
Right.
And that's so not the case.
Well, I'm getting at what makes Will Winkelman unique and different, because when I look at your work,
we're very hands-on,
speaks very unique.
Yeah. Part of it is my attraction to nature and pulling nature into dwellings. Mm-hmm. Part of it is my obsession with daylight. Mm-hmm. And I've seen how clients respond to it. I rediscovered it again in renovating my house and being home 24/7 instead of going to the office 5 days a week and being busy during the weekend. Suddenly I'm home all day, every day, and I'm finding every sunny spot that are big, clear windows instead of multi-divided light with transoms windows brings in the house.
So you've switched out the windows too to be much
They're
larger.
all big glass. And to the extent that did a good one with my wife. She was totally on board. So we went from traditional to modern. Traditional form takes a modern character. Mm-hmm. And the relearning again, the humility of relearning, we can talk about, my joke about, so what's new to talk about in architecture? It's like, oh, well, we can talk about daylight. That's been done a lot. It's like, well, I just relearned about that. And I'm 63, right? And it's the personal experience of, there's puddles of light coming in here, and that's lovely. But it's like, wow, we redid that in an entirely different way. We worked with existing openings as a rule and did really clean, big, simple glass. And not only does the character of the daylight in the house change, which is huge, but then you're bringing nature into the house and projecting yourself out. And it's like a couple of our windows are like big paintings.
Right.
And they're moments where you're projected into the wetland. It's like, this isn't a small room. This room is that big.
Right.
And it wasn't before.
Yeah.
And so it's the character and nuance of that level of design, the obsession with playing with those things design-wise. That's part of what's, so back to what comes most naturally to me is being subordinate to nature. I'm very detail oriented. So I could have been an industrial designer in another life. And so I love designing like idiosyncratic fireplaces and technical things, smaller scale things, hands-on things. I can't make them myself. I'm pretty cruddy with that. But I work with some fantastic people who are enablers. You have to, another overused word, big time, collaborate.
Yep.
I'm nothing. I've got this office of these wonderful people, and Winkelman Architecture is just a name. It's a community that's like so essential that they create it, not me. Right. I join a conversation, I leave a conversation. Right?
My wife has said that same thing about me. Not that I'm nothing, but that she's working with a group of PTs that are starting a fellowship program, and there's this guy that kind of developed the theories that they're developing this around, and he's extremely creative and open-minded and knows like how the body works and why, and has just created all this amazing knowledge around how to heal people through physical therapy.
Yep.
But he needs people around him to organize those thoughts into a coherent thing and a teaching, blah, blah, blah. And she is like, kind of like you, because I get all these ideas and then I can execute them, but then they produce usually something that requires then management that I'm horrible at. And then she has to come in and pick up where I'm like, I can't handle this.
Yep.
So,
yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So your observation of, wow, architecture is hard because you have to take one thing and nurse it from beginning to end. It's a long haul.
Yeah.
And I actually don't do that. My people now do that. I used to do that. So I've done it in the trenches. That's where my job is, to work with you just roll into conversations. So one key word that is probably part of my success is humility. And that's something I look for in hiring. And architecture has a problem with ego. And and
why do you think that is? Because you're right, I think.
There are these statements, these buildings. It's like, it's a big deal.
Yeah.
Right? To get a commission for one of these public buildings. And it's like, wow, I'm on Main Street. And how awesome is that? Assuming it's awesome.
Right.
A lot of it's not. So that master architect thing, I guess, is, I don't know. but that's not me. And that's where I'd much rather work just with you and not try to be alpha out in the public domain and outgun everyone else with the coolest commission. I'd much rather work quietly with you, creating something special.
Right.
And so humility is my word, and that's what I look for in the people that are part of our crew. And because it doesn't play well when the chest gets puffed up and it's like,
right.
And that works really well in a very honest way with clients.
Yeah.
They respect you. We listen, and it's like, oh, by the way, I'll push back and go, oh, that's not a great idea. And being candid is really an important piece to it, and not just rolling over. It's like, oh, hey, I think what I heard you say is this, but it made me think of that.
Right.
So that's where design's kind of a conversation. But and it's funny, one of the in builders, humility is really important. It sounds funny. Have you interviewed Nate Holyoke?
No, but I've shot a lot of his work. He'd be an interesting person to talk to.
Yeah.
He's done amazing stuff that I've been involved with.
I'm concerned, he's probably one of the most successful builder in the state. Does incredible quality of work.
Is he based down east more so, or?
Dedham. Okay. Yeah. And yet he's exceedingly humble. And that's the key, is which means you listen, but you have enough self-confidence to speak clearly and redirect when necessary.
Right.
So anyway.
Well, it's such a hard learning curve to learn about yourself, and to get to that place to know about yourself enough to where you can. Every time I hear an interview with Robin Williams, there's this marker of humility depending on where in his career and struggles with alcoholism you catch him, and in his really reflective times, it's just heartbreaking in the greatest way to listen to what he's saying, that true humility comes through humiliation, and then when you start to learn about yourself enough to be able to put all of that ego and everything aside long enough to just simply listen, and actually understand like the ideas behind the thing that would offend your ego, and just deal with those ideas in an effective manner. Rather than I'll puff up more than you, and then I'll be dominant here. But instead to say, oh, I see what you're saying. I wouldn't have, and to be present enough to say that makes me feel like my son. That makes me feel a little uncomfortable. I don't know why. Let me think about that. Like if you can verbalize that, all of a sudden the person you're interacting with is like, you just told me you're uncomfortable? Yeah. You mean, okay, well, all right, I'll try and help you figure this out. What's going, and when you can get to a place like that, I really do believe that the truth and beauty are very much so one and the same. And that they're outpourings of each other, and when you get really down to it, whatever a concept or God is, that I believe foundational characters of what any religion, any belief system would assign to the divine, we'll say, that the most foundational things in there are going to be love and truth. And those ideas of like, we can kind of separate love out from the practice of architecture a bit and just focus on truth, like the truth of maintenance cycles, the truth of like, if you don't put the money in now, you're going to put more money in later, and you're going to be miserable until you put that money in. Those difficult conversations, if we put the ego aside and we look at the truth and the results and everything else, it's just everything else becomes easier when you leave a lot of yourself behind. And it's such a weird dynamic that's so counterintuitive to youth. In my recent losing of youth, this is what I would say.
Well, I don't know, part of residential work is leaving yourself behind and going, it's about you.
Yeah,
It's not
that
about
would be
me.
hard for me. I don't know how to do that.
Whereas if I'm working for TD Bank, I've got to figure out how it presents on Main Street and et cetera.
Right.
So it's different. And that's what's nice about it for me is it's not about me and my ego. It's about you and your vision. And yeah, I have a vision too. So let's talk about it, and it evolves and morphs.
Right.
And it's not what you were thinking exactly and not what I was thinking exactly, but it becomes an ours. That's like, wow, cool.
What are the markers?
And the ours is kind of a really important piece to my vibe in that it's not my ego, my house, my special cool piece,
right.
or any one person's in our world. It's the product of everyone cooking this together, including the client, including the builder's voice. You know, we're so that's what's nice.
Do you always try and get the builder involved as soon as possible?
Yeah, that's so important. And if the builder respects you and listens, I call contract blueprints or construction documents, which are actually contract documents, which actually sets up the architect to be adversarial with the builder, because the architect's role is actually to be our builder's agent, owner's agent, enforcing the contract.
Right.
How screwed is that? I mean, who's getting along there?
You're right. And it's usually by the end of it, the builder and the owner will be friends, and the architect's kind of like out in the cold,
struggling. And so we much prefer to bring a builder on board at the end of design. But as we're building our wall sections, it's like, so what's the recipe for this energy high performance building, and what are the material set? And here's some ideas we have for materials. Oh, something new. Cool. One of my most cynical things is building science. Sounds so specific. It's a series of opinions that change over time.
It's almost as ambiguous as dietary science.
Sure. Yeah. Surveys. That sounds so factual. They're actually opinions.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Our land is, plus or minus a couple acres, depending on which survey you go off of.
Exactly. So the whole absolutes, so I'll go back to the prescriptive architect who does the contract documents that says that Mr. Builder or Miss Builder, you need to build exactly this. And because we are it's like, no. This is the humility part again. Of going, hey, how would you do this? And you may say it in a way that it's like, whoa, I wouldn't do that, and this is why. Or, whoa, caution on this. Or, hey, that's a great detail of bringing the siding down to the foundation. And so...
And you, I mean, to toot your horn, you've gotten some, crazy stuff built.
Yeah.
Like no builder would want to touch that until you've actually... You've sold the vision or something, and the builder's like, this is going to be fun.
And so that's where it's like that builder has to buy in there. It's an ours again.
Yeah.
Right. So you bring the builder on board when you're building your wall section. It's like, so how is it framed? What are the products? Bring them on board early, and they feel respect.
Yeah.
And respect is, by the way, genuine.
Yeah.
And unless it isn't, and then when it doesn't work, it's like, hey, we need something new. It happens. But it's like you build the team, and then it's like you're all empowered to like, so now what are we going to do? This is cool. Right.
Do you have specific builders that you go to for specific types of jobs, or do you find a builder to be of a character that's good to work with?
A lot of it's geography.
Yeah.
Because we work all over the state, and now we're on the internet era, so people find us from. We've got a project in Missouri. It's crazy business, but it's like, we'll travel. Here's how it rolls, and so. Which is kind of an interesting evolution of how our practice works. It's so much is on the internet now.
Yeah,
people find you probably travel a lot now, right?
Yeah.
So,
it for an architectural photographer, the weird thing I found is that if I was speaking to young Trent starting out, I would say build relationships with people that you see that have talent that are starting out. Because with the established firms, they're generally already have their, so you either have to murder their architectural photographer and hope that they pick you, or find the people with talent that are young and starting out, because you will grow with them.
Yep.
Like, as you serve their needs as best as possible, they'll only be thankful as they grow and continue to use you.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of how those relationships generally go.
Yeah,
So,
you're exactly right. Loyalty.
yeah.
And it's like, until something goes sideways, it's like, hey, this is a great relationship. Let's build our team.
Yeah.
And so that's how we work a lot. In terms of with builders, you find the right builder that's got the right vibe and scale and geography and price point, how craft or how budget. We do budget.
Right.
Is it? And then that finds the fit.
I've had such a bad track record with like interacting. I go for cheap.
Yeah.
I'm a sucker for.
Yeah.
I thought I got 3 estimates on a recent project we did, and the cheapest estimate was just nowhere to be considered. And so I went with the cheapest estimate, and it was my fault for not spotting that this is not the kind of work that this contractor does.
Yeah.
You shouldn't
Yep.
ruin his next
Yep.
6 months by hiring him.
Yeah.
Which, we kind of ended, and my wife had to come in and like actually do, like, she can handle relationships like that.
Yeah.
Where I just, and that's such an important skill to figure out those personal communication points where you identify and then know that, okay, we're speaking the same language, we're going to be working the same here, we'll work good together.
Yeah.
I don't generally, in that situation, I'm very poor at doing it for some reason.
Where I've found I feel success is having found my voice or willingness to tell you what I think your project's going to cost.
Right.
Money and what we're going to cost.
Right.
And I have a very thin skin. It's like my whole introvertedness. So it's like, I don't want you upset with me 6 months after you've been paying me a lot of money.
So let's be really clear about this cost up front.
Really clear up front.
Yeah.
And so I've learned how to be very clear up front, and quite good at it, and very candid. And I'll show you, you'll go, hey, that's a cool project on your website. I'll tell you what that cost on a square foot basis. And this is how the recipe we come up with. And so now what do you want to do? We can sketch it in 2 hours. And just as a notion, I call it a graphical representation of your program, interpretation of your program. Okay. So it's a plan instead of a pile of words. And it's not your house. It could be if it was awesome, and sometimes it is, but usually it's like, whoa, that gets scrambled again. But it's a moment where you can take square footage off of it, toss it in the spreadsheet,
Right.
and there is reality, and it's just math. I'm not personally like, oh, I'm so sorry. It's math.
Right.
And it's a fact. And it's awesome because the spreadsheet is just a fact. And it's like, this is what I'm afraid I think it's going to cost.
Right.
If we're still playing together, then, there's a big margin here. This is a chainsaw in terms of accuracy, but it's something, because everyone needs something as a starting point, or else you have a rough moment 6 months after you start, right? And that's some people's way of working it, because you want to but I just hate that. So. And then you can be really clear about what I'm going to cost, because there's a relationship between what you're going to spend and what we're going to be. And so I can be really clear up front. So there's no conflict about money during our process. We're just playing together. Just having fun.
How does conflict affect you?
No, I don't do conflict well. Feel it deeply.
Yeah.
Feel it deeply.
But
And that's
being
part
an
of how I've
architect
learned.
with all the pitfalls of construction and everything else, like I hear stories from other people who are architects, and I'm just like, I could never do that.
That's why I work in one domain,
okay,
where I do really well. I know it very well. Instead of trying to be the master of 15 domains, and I do branch banks, and I do a CVS, and I do a prep school, little addition, and you're always out of your depth.
Yeah.
You're barely getting it done, and it's cool until it goes sideways.
right.
And it goes sideways. It goes sideways in my world.
But now it's like I'm proficient enough in my domain. I'm still learning. God, residential design is actually quite demanding, as I think you have a clue. So it's enough. That right there. And
so
to know it.
How has residential design been in the time of COVID?
It's exploded.
Yeah, I knew the answer asking the question from everyone else I've talked to, but yeah.
We're in a state called Vacation Land, right? And with our coast and the lakes and all that, it's like, and wow, this is where we work and practice. It's like, what a blessing. I'm working today and I'm on this lake and it's a beautiful site, and we do all these design sessions where at this point in my life and my practices ecosystem is, instead of talking to you about what you want for your house and then go sit in a corner in the office and design up a pretty picture and go do this, we'll bring our plastic table into the woods, and we have a bunch of folding chairs because you got to be comfortable for the day, and hopefully you have a survey or at least something that starts to draw, and we have some booklets of our work to look at images, and we walk and talk on the site, and we talk about goals and ideas that you may have, and we start drawing. And the client goes, oh, that's cool. Or it's like, no. I hate that part. And it's like, great. Next piece of paper, it's just paper. And it's me and whoever I'm working with at the office, and there were a couple people at the office and not me. We all work this way now. And we pile into the woods, and it's our little charrette, right? Little day session in the woods. And hopefully by the time you're done, you set some stakes. It's like, hey, this is what we talked about. And here's an orientation, and here's an access line in, and here's where a road might be, or whatever. And it may all change. But that's how we roll process now. And I would have never thought that I would work that way, being an introvert, that the best of you comes when you're working out loud.
Right.
In a conversation with the client, who a lot of times you think, oh, I want to come up with my idea before the client. It's like, no, I have worked with a lot of really smart, powerful, creative people who just can't articulate it.
Right.
And on one hand, it's like, I don't want to be someone's agent to just draw up what they want. But you know what? Usually what they think they wanted isn't actually what they want.
Right.
So it's like, so it's really interesting working with a lot of these very smart, creative people who can't visualize and see where it evolves.
You're working, you're not a manipulator, but they bring a rough hewn preconceived idea that you then sculpt.
Everyone does. Yeah. They have some sort of preconception.
Yeah.
So there's a seed. Great. I've got a seed. I walk on a site, and it's like, wow, the sun's coming this way. Daylight.
Yeah.
And the view is this way. That's why you bought it. And so let's get rid of the car. No one wants to own the car. And those are my preconceptions that start orienting me to a site. And now it's like, what did you want again? Oh, well, here's what's awesome, and here's what might not be great. And there it flows. So that's the benefit of being 63 years old instead of 43.
Well, I mean, architects peak late in career.
There's a reason.
Yeah.
You know,
the complexity.
I shouldn't say it. But, you know, when you're younger, you don't have the experience.
Yeah, it's so
experience. It's so experience driven. And yet, you know, I'll look through. I just did this for a really cool project I worked on 15 years ago, and really cool, involved camp. It's all over our website in various iterations, and it's gonna be for sale. And so I was putting together an archive of drawings that created it. And so I went through all the history of all these sketches that I'd done. And this is a client who's a connoisseur of hand sketch and not computer stuff. And hand is what I do. And I'm looking through all these old drawings. It's like, wow, it was like, wow, it makes me tired. I can't do that today. But it's like, wow, I was doing that then. I'm not so great today. It's like, I really had it down then. It's like my younger self was better than I thought. I don't know. That's a weird thing to say, but maybe I should give myself more credit in my earlier iterations.
Well, I have some degree of a similar I mean, I've been shooting architecture now for about 15 years or more.
Yeah.
And the first project I tried was the courthouse here in Biddeford that, let's see, I think it's Alan Coolingholm. He's at PDT. I don't know if he's still there, but someone anyways was involved and got me access to the courthouse, which I was just coming out of being an architect to think I'm like, maybe this is how I'm going to make a living.
Oh, you went to architecture school.
Yeah, I went to architecture school, practiced for 3 years with Caleb, and then was like, let's be friends.
Yep.
So I got this opportunity to shoot a, civic piece of architecture and had it all to myself on like a Sunday or something. And I got in there and I didn't know what I was doing. And I had never tried to form an image of the inside of something. And you're just not struck with that task before,
Huge challenge.
And it's like, whoa, I don't know how to do this. And I tried for a few hours and I just gave up eventually. I was like, I don't know how to do this. I don't know that this is going to work for me.
Yeah.
And I got some images of the outside, I think. And then I just happened into a house that Stephen Blatt had designed and built, or had some shoreline builders had built it down in Goose Rocks Beach. And it was a really, really classic little thing. And I went by the project and just saw it. And from driving by, it goes through this turning as you drive by, the project moves kind of.
Yep.
And I was like, right there, that's it. I saw that's where the camera needs to be to see that. And so I was like, that's a great image. I saw it. And I was like, I've got to find something. Told me find the builder, because the architect doesn't know you, and they're going to have more critical thinking going on around the money spent and the time invested. They're not going to go with a new,
and they're going to want to control you more.
Yes. Yep. And I found out who the builder was, and I approached them and said, hey, I'll give you the images for free if you can get me access to that. And I think I still have that image on my website somewhere. It's a great image,
cool.
but
that's
like
excellent.
there's a shade down and there's stuff that's messed up. But it's like, it was that first thing that like it was a lock and a key. Like I was like, oh, there it is. And the ratios and everything clicked. And it was like, that was my first logged experience. And every time since then that I get an image that I feel like there was a lock and a key relationship, I find myself, I'll transfer the image to my phone and I'll look at it throughout like a week. I'll keep looking at it, studying it, and absorbing it. I'll find myself looking at it as I go to bed. If I really like the image. And there's something about the experience and then the absorption of the result that sits with me. But I also do that with my failures a little bit too. When I feel like I've messed up, I really dwell on it to try and
understand it.
To understand it. But it's that process of understanding this is your experience, and it's the greatest teacher. And that if you can somehow turbocharge that through just the realization of that, rather than looking back on it and saying like, I look at what I do now, and sometimes I have an imposter syndrome kind of thing where I'm like, anyone can push the button on this. Anyone can stand here. Anyone can sketch, or, and then you start to describe what you do, and you realize the complexity of your experience,
your undertaking,
that's involved, and that's when I start to realize that, you're not dissimilar to a prostitute in what you're doing. You're giving of your experience and of yourself. It's obviously not the same invasive physical process, but you're selling your experience, which is we have invented money as a means of fungible value. And it's a good thing, but experience. I just don't, I'm starting to wonder where the education system is going, because you can learn so much now on YouTube and just books and everything else that it seems like on experiential learning is so much more deep. It imparts to you wisdom, not just knowledge. That's what it is. The process of going from not knowing something to knowing something is education, but the process of experience is going from not knowing to knowing plus wisdom. And that's what makes it the next time you do it, that wisdom is with you, not just the knowledge. And there's something there.
So, part of that is part of that experience is learning to listen to others. And not be guarded and defensive because you don't really know and you're not that confident yourself in a certain setting.
Right.
So it's one of my little takeaways.
Yeah. It's a hard thing to, like, I've gone through a distancing from what I used to believe to now studying human psychology and philosophy, trying to understand myself and where I was at and why I was there and why I'm here now. And then looking at, groups that I was associated and not associated with. And then now seeing such a stark division within the country as far as political stuff. And to see, it's this same kind of thing where you identify with, somewhat of an ideology on one side or the other. And to see the shortcomings in reasoning or logic on both sides. Like I'm very much a fence rider, middleman kind of thing. And it's just such a sad thing to see that I don't know if it's just age that puts people through that and the inexperience that opens your eyes to that. I hope that's the case and that this will all self-correct, but who knows? I don't know where I'm going with this.
That's cool.
But why can't we all be more like Labradors,
right? Just all about food.
All about food, yes, right.
All about food.
Food and scratchies. Yeah. But when you work creatively, like how much of awareness do you have of your own creative process, what gives you creative energy and how you protect that?
Yeah. I don't know. It comes. It just happens. That's the weird thing. It's kind of like we were talking about COVID. I had a breakthrough case of COVID, and I discovered that I didn't have smell. And I just discovered it. It was like, oh.
How did you realize that? Like you saw something that you knew you should smell and it wasn't there?
I don't know whether I was trying to smell milk and to see if it was bad for coffee or if I was slicing an orange and I went.
Right.
But it was this very passive moment where it was all of a sudden I was like, oh, wow. I had no idea. It wasn't something I worked at. So creativity, I'm always... You're always afraid you're going to lose it. You're always afraid you're not going to think different in a certain situation. And I don't know whether experience certainly is an overlay in it, but it's not the core of it, right? Experience will help me be more thoughtful and aware of how your backdrop hangs here and sags and from the past, I'll have a thought as to what doesn't work well, and that'll help inform how I'll go, hey, well, what if? It just happens. And so I actually do, though, music is important and not being distracted. And so music's really important to just kind of get in the zone, and headphones or something like that when you need to be in the zone where you're working. But so much you and I talking now about, hey, this is what I'm thinking of. How can I? It's not about a house necessarily, right? And it's like, hey, I've got to wire my camera without these cables all over the floor. Well, let's spitball or whatever you want to say the word is. And it's like, oh, well, what if it's this and what if it's that? And it just snowballs. And some of it's just inherent in what comes out.
What do you think the connection between creativity and age is? Because I think about that a lot, because especially...
That's a really good thing to think about.
Especially with photography, I feel like it's a very youth-oriented medium because of the instant nature of it, especially now.
The way it's
Whereas
changed,
architecture, you have to move many dollars, many people... many mindsets to accomplish anything.
Yeah. That's one of the frictions in architecture, perhaps, is that when you're young, you're not experienced on all the things that can go wrong.
and you haven't been around the block on exploring a whole variety, it takes a year or two to build a really cool piece, right? And it takes a year preceding it to design it. And then you've got to find a client who is kind of drawn to you and interested in doing that thing. So there's a 3-year span there between, hello, yeah, let's do something, to let's photograph it.
Right.
So there's a long span of time that goes down, and so you have to be patient with it. And so it takes experience, time, age, to burn through enough of those to find your voice, to find your confidence. And at a younger age, you have to have some faux confidence, or there's ego there, which isn't good. But you've got creativity at that age. You've got ideas. They're just not proven by, oh, well, I know it's going to leak. Cool idea, but that's a non-starter. I've been there. And so that's one of the differences. Hopefully, I don't know if you age out of creativity or not. If that's if creativity is a uniform response in our minds, then experience is what helps take creativity and make it more real, right? Not real, more successful. Successful. Because a lot of young architects have fantastic ideas.
A higher level of utility.
Yeah.
Okay, so this
and success in its.
This is really interesting from a biological, philosophical, and psychological point of view. Let's see if I can remember all the parts of it that connect them. So when a baby is born, they only have emotion. They have no articulate intelligence. Okay, but as they age and learn and form language, they essentially, to my understanding, and I could be getting this wrong, they are essentially eliminating dendrite connections within the brain to establish pathways of functionality to be able to work within the world. So a lot of the way that neuroscientists, I believe, describe it is that they're essentially tripping balls when they're born. They don't know what's going on, and everything's connected to everything. But like through that, trip, essentially, they start to slowly create pathways, and the pathways receive the attention, and the in-betweens that aren't as utilitarian get the dendrites ungrow or get eliminated or trimmed. Okay, so all the possibilities are limited and reduced down to the more practical, right? So the creativity involved within that, like you want anything possible to some degree, but at the same time you need that utility. And it seems like when a baby's born, they're 100% emotion, zero articulated knowledge. Somewhere around midlife, you have a crisis where they intersect, and if you let emotion die off and you become completely articulate, they're like the ancient Egyptians have this kind of saying that if logic and reason are embraced too deeply, it can have a very malevolent side to it, which kind of strips you of the emotion, the empathy, and everything else, and you become all practical, rational logic. And the thing they're finding, they're starting to allow research with like psilocybin mushrooms and everything else. And the thing they're finding with that there appears to potentially be, this is all, cutting edge, weird, whatever. There seems to be a lot of potential for mental health things, because what these things do and why they call a trip and why you apparently smell colors and whatever else is because all of a sudden these dendrites are being encouraged to like just reach out and touch someone, essentially. And all the pathways that you've established that you're used to are all of a sudden, every part of anything is the same path anymore. And so the thing they find is that people, after the powerful hallucinogenic effect dies off, they can have different like spiritual lasting effects from that. But the after effect that lasts up to 6 months to a year is that they feel a heightened sense of creativity and effectiveness with that, because there's more of the possibility of trying a different pathway that wasn't there before. And it's just so interesting, the connection of all of that, why when you're young, you're naturally more open. You naturally consider more pathways, because you have to figure out, what am I going to do? How am I going to provide for myself? And it goes with the saying, if you're not liberal when you're young, you're heartless. If you're not conservative when you're old, you're brainless. This is what they say on Fox News a lot, I guess. And so there's this natural tendency, like once you find what you're going to do, you naturally become more conservative. It's like, all right, I've found what I'm going to do. It's going to provide for me and my family. So now, instead of trying new things all the time, I'm going to protect that. Now, the danger there is that, oh, you're a formulaic architect or a formulaic photographer, and you're going to do the same thing every time. It'll go for a while, and then you'll be old news. So there's this incredible.
Well, and you'll lose your passion.
Yeah,
because that's part of, you know.
Yeah, and even if you just use that passion too much, you don't want to do it anymore. You know that. I watched a professional surfer, Andy Irons, and his brother Bruce Irons. Odd people, but surfing, it's the most selfish, enjoyable thing a person can do, in my opinion. And you watch these people get into professional surfing and lose their love for it. You're riding liquid energy. But because there's all this pressure, like if I don't perform, I'll lose my value, I'll lose my profession, I won't be able to do. You just started out doing this as a kid just because you loved doing it. Like you're still going to be able to do what you loved most that got you into doing this. Just, it's always this tightrope of all those things that once you become aware of all those other things, then you can start to set up secondary systems of protection of that valuable thing, and also start a process of pushing that thing to that point of failure more often to see, is this maybe a path? Nope. Oh, okay. We covered all our other bases. This is a lot of what I try and do when I shoot, is I'll try and cover the bases that people expect, and then I'll try and find areas to push towards failure, you know? And I tell myself push towards failure, because you have to know that in going into chaos, that there's a high likelihood that that's not going to succeed, but there's an opportunity, you know?
Fair.
So
that's an interesting thought. And see, in your domain, that's a digital moment.
In
mine, it's like, a built house for someone.
Right?
It's like, oh no, careful. It was like test of failure. No, that's the tissue paper on the floor.
Especially now too.
Well, but we do that all the time. That's
right. It's in trace paper, and now, I mean, I know how like Brian Vandenbrink used to have to work. You'd have to have the actual film, and then you'd have to actually Polaroid at $1 a pop every time.
Oh yeah.
And
that was very stiff process back in the day.
And now it's so different. And I came into the practice of architectural photography right when it was at probably, I think, one of its biggest changing moments in the history of it, because it went from film to digital, and that was just a paradigm shift. And I was able to take advantage of that. And that's, I think, honestly, why I've been successful. And it allowed it was a moment of chaos where youth was on my side there. I never really verbalized that.
No, that was a good moment. Because that was a huge transition. Huge.
And I watched people get less work that I looked up to, because they were established in the ways of doing things that were not staying up to
There's a big change.
Oh, and it's
not an artistic change, it's a technical change. And so it requires a different.
Well, and that, interestingly, that technical change brings philosophical roadblocks with it. It's like, you can't do it that way.
Right.
That's too easy.
And do I still want to do that way? If it's this way, I don't know.
And it's, I remember a friend of mine who's an established architect around here, who I'll just leave nameless. I remember him saying once, like, oh, if I have to work on CAD, I'm just not going to be an architect. And I thought, at the time, I was like, we all know you're going to have to work on CAD. Why are you saying this? You know, but it's just that youth compared to experience thing. And yeah.
I used to, I wasn't birthed being able to sketch or draw.
Oh, really?
I forced myself to draw three-dimensionally.
Yep.
So that I could see something better.
Yep.
And then, oh, by the way, it's super helpful because now I can show you, right?
Yeah.
So I can sketch pretty fluidly at this point. But so that's my tool, okay? And I can sit in a meeting and we can sketch, and that's cool. With staff and interviewing to hire, I used to say, listen, and maybe this is the humility part that I was a little too humble about. It's like, I've got my tool that's like, could be digital or film and photography. I sketch with my hand, and I don't do CAD. I still don't. But still, I won't. Too late for that.
You get to say that.
Yeah,
I mean, you started the business.
Yeah, I'll say it. I don't have to do CAD. But I used to say, it's like, I don't care what your tool is, but you need your special way of communicating. Okay. And so if someone's like so good with three-dimensional SketchUp or ArchiCAD or Revit or whatever you're really awesome with, then that's great. That's your special tool. And I've totally backpedaled on that because it's like, in architecture, you have to be able to talk with your hands.
Yeah.
It's just so essential. So it's like, you have to sketch. So that's a common denominator from 500 years ago to today, as far as I'm concerned. It's like, and I even interviewed someone who was youngish, who really wanted to not work in CAD at all, but wanted to parallel bar, which is what I have. And so I had to laugh, because it's like, no, you're not going there in my world. I know how long it takes for me I can do a quick sketch, but I'm not the fast, the really detailed 3D drawing. You can do that in CAD. That's great. But you have to talk with your hand. You need to be able to have some confidence and comfort just scribbling. And it's like, it doesn't have to be pretty. I can teach pretty if that's where it needs to go. But it's just talk with your hands and not be shy about it. And that's a common denominator from way back to now, regardless of technology, which I've had to learn to kind of go, hey, bring a sketchbook. Doesn't have to be pretty. And now we're working together. It's like someone else, Todd Richardson or someone great to work with, said, bring to the interview the stuff, the trace that's on the floor, not the pretty pictures.
Mm-hmm.
The working stuff, the process, the what you just kicked out,
right.
Because that's process, which is the nature of what we do. And I'm not sure how technology has changed that in a fluid kind of conversational way. Yeah, someone goes back and builds it in SketchUp or ArchiCAD or Revit or whatever, and that is when technology has made a huge change.
Right.
One other technological observation in there, which is interesting in terms of architecture, was back in the 90s-ish, CAD and 3D CAD became a thing. And we stopped building cardboard models because we had computer models. And
right.
How cool is this, that you can see your building three-dimensionally on the computer screen?
But then if you gave them any color, the client were like, why is that wall red?
I know, yeah, the whole photorealistic thing is so hard. But for like a decade and a half, we just had computer models to show clients, and because that was kind of like, yeah, you can see it, isn't that cool? You can fly through it and spin it around, but there's no sense of scale. And the whole photorealistic thing gets so fetched up. And somewhere along the line of 5 or 10 years ago, Eric at the office said, hey, we have these 3D files. Can we hit print? And I was like, oh, I don't know. So our first path towards it was really a disaster. We bought a kit for a 3D printer from a MakerBot from
cool.
the whole Maker thing.
Yeah.
And of course, that took a year of then he gave the kit to someone at his school who was a science teacher. And we bought a 3D printer. And then we had to, Eric had to nurture the machine to actually print a model. So I hired my friend's best friend, who's now really skilled with everything that we do with Office, to be our print driver, right? The intermediary to the printer.
Printers are...
Now it's pretty fluid that ArchiCAD talks to the 3D printer quite well. And if you do 16th scale, it's a blob of plastic, and it's kind of like, oh yeah, it could mass like that, and that's a conversation. But if you do 8th scale, you're doing walls with openings, and it's very informative. It's just white plastic.
Yeah.
So it's another tool in understanding your design for a client. And the computer rendering, we can get it photorealistic and print it on photo paper and do it big, and it's so awesome. And the trees look real. It's like, wow, is that real or what? But then this abstract model is so informative, and it's stepping back to the old school of cardboard models, and yet it's the new technology that enables it to be a quick process instead of like, oh, that took a week. So that's been an interesting technology evolution of how we got to that path. And so it's not new, but it's semi-new for us to now we do it regularly. But it used to be new that it was like we were doing 3D printed buildings. We still do a cut site out of foam core, and we put on a watercolor so the site is intelligible and feels good. Anyway.
And then you essentially just 3D print the building and put it in the site, and then the individual can just themselves
and
move
what's
around
cool,
it.
It goes back to the old school thing. You take it outside. It's one of my coolest meetings. I took it to this meeting at someone's house, and after we met indoors on the dining table, this was a whole crew of family, we went outside in the yard, and I placed the model up on a bench or something and rotated it for the sun south. And this is the time of day with this sunlight coming in, and everyone's down on the ground with their iPhones taking pictures, looking in. And just like we used to do as young architects with the cameras with the scope that would look into a model. I don't know if you even ever knew or did that, but you could see the interior space with the camera, and you can see the light that comes in. It's very elemental and very fundamental. It's not all as refined and sophisticated as computer modeling on your computer for daylight, but it's a different feeling. It's really interesting.
I wonder what there is about that more elemental, substrate or interaction of that kind of thing that feels very different than the video game.
Step one, it's a three-dimensional file, but on the computer, it's a two-dimensional screen.
Now,
it's a screen.
It
gets rid of the screen.
I wonder if there's a similarity, the difference between experiencing a movie and reading a book, because the book is far more elemental, but it engages your mind more than a movie. Yeah,
and so the computer. So you do a computer three-dimensional image. Well, how photorealistic is the image?
Yeah,
and how much hand-holding do you have to do to go? Yeah, no, we don't mean that the roof is that shade of gray. And those lines, no, they won't be that strong. It's like, it's so tricky doing without it being absolute photorealistic, in which case you made all the decisions.
Right.
And you've milked it for 2 weeks of time, right? So it's hard to kind of gauge how far to take a computer rendering.
Right.
That's why they're great when they're abstract. But someone has to have the vision, and what the white model lets you do, and then you can have a storyboard or an image board or just some materials to throw at it. And here's a piece of Corten steel, here's a piece of board form concrete, here's a bark shingle or whatever, and now imagine this is this and that's that, and it's reading the book.
Yeah,
that's a really good analogy.
Yeah, I think there's a fair amount of truth in that. There's something about that, because when we drove across the country, and my wife picked out books on tape, or books on iPhone for the kids to listen to, and we'd listen to them as we go, and it was really interesting to see their horizons expand through that. These kind of survival tales and stuff that little boys really just like woo, but their kind of perspective and how they looked at things and related to things kind of changed from that influence of those stories and what they heard that they then had to create in their own head. That I think you're asking the individual to engage in the experience more, to do some work on their own with it, and that that creates that different thing that you're
Yeah.
talking about.
Yeah.
That is maybe more genuine in some way. I don't know. We can leave it at that.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Well, I really appreciate finally getting to be able to talk to you, because you are one of my favorite architects in Maine. The work that you do is so creative and so playful in so many points that it's an experience of joy to be able to walk through some of your projects that are like, whoa, someone did this, that whalebone type stair down here, and you know, the one down near Roque Bluffs area that we'd photographed.
Yep.
I mean, they're just all so just so incredibly unique.
Thank you.
They're almost on. They're like a second cousin to what's that apartment complex in Barcelona or something that's it's like a cell that you're walking through. And I mean like a biological cell, not a prison. But it's very organic, but still it's not that, but it's this different thing that's so organic and playful, but yet architectural too. Then it's really incredible. So anyone listening who'd like to look at Will's stuff, just go to his website. Or
how about that?
There you go.
Yep.
But again, thank you for coming down.
Absolutely.
It's been a pleasure to be able to shoot some of your work, and I love that we started on a free project essentially on that bus.
Pretty much, yeah.
Years ago, which I think
We started before that.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
Panther
man.
Pond.
Which one?
Panther Pond.
Oh yeah. That kitchen.
That was the
had
first time.
The
the skylight.
overhead,
Yeah.
And there was a really good image out of the kids' room that was really high on the top part of that image. I remember. And there was like a purple bed or something in there.
I remember you setting up to take a photograph in the screen porch, which had a lot of glass in it. You're looking west.
There's
towards
couches on one side and board games and stuff.
Yeah. And it was a gabled space.
Yeah.
Looking big screened gabled, looking towards the lake, and you're going to take an afternoon photograph looking into the sun.
Yeah, that was a hard one.
And I thought to myself, I'm out sitting in the car. I don't know who you are. And I thought, wow, this is going to be a disaster. I didn't know anything about HDR, right?
Great.
In multiple images, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
It's like, I had no idea. I was like, whoa, this is going to be bad. But so that was like the cover. So there was my little lesson on photography and the digital age.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
you couldn't do that with Chromes.
That would have been hard. It's also, there's something to, but there's also this advantage to the stupidity of youth that there's something that says I might be able to do that. Whereas someone with experience is like, there's a very, very small likelihood you're going to be able to do that. Because if I look at back, like when I first told my parents, like, I'm going to go and I'm going to take pictures and pay for a house.
Yeah.
And my dad, his guttural, he was like, you can't support a family.
Right.
And I was like, I've always had this thing about me that I knew there was low expectations of me for some reason. It's something about my disposition that I welcomed. It was kind of like it was a sneak attack or something.
Yeah.
But it did not faze me at all. And like within the first year, I think I made more money than my dad, or the second year, and I always rubbed his nose in that. You know?
Yeah.
And he's very happy for it. And
Yeah.
But there's also, there's this experience, but there's all this the ignorance of youth. And if I look back at it, I'm like, man, the likelihood of that half court shot going in is so slim. But I don't know, is it? And your personality in the situation. But
Anyway, that was cool.
We could keep going. So thanks
very good.
again.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity.
And Winkelman Architecture, not architects.
Yep. Architecture.
WinkelmanArchitecture.com, and you guys are on Instagram.
That's who we are today.
That's who we are today.
Cool.
I
one of the things I'm always hesitant about is naming and brand, because it's not me, right?
Right.
It
started by you, but there's
started
so much
by
more.
me. There's Eric Sokol and Joanna Shaw and Alex Lennon. You've talked to Joanna. They're principals with the firm, and it's like I would be nothing without them.
Yeah.
And the layer of people who are working with us. So it's like it takes a village. It's like
anytime I get a compliment, I think of my parents. I think of my hugely about my wife. Tim
Yeah.
does so much of what looks good here.
All the support.
And it's just like you'd be a fool with ideas had you not been able to convince in some point to like, I got ideas, guys. You what do you think? And without the support of those who make it all possible, you're just nobody. And that's
exactly right.
Yeah.
So I had a very patient wife during my renovation.
Oh, yeah.
A wife of 30 some odd years. So
yeah, that's a whole nother podcast right there.
A lot of lovely
we should do, I mean, if you're open to it, I'd love to do like just a one take thing of like a tour of your house discussing like what changed and everything else someday.
That would be interesting.
That'd be really interesting to actually walk through and just do a one take, like start the camera and just do a tour and talk about the differences of things. That could be really interesting to just see it.
And it's like the big scale learning things, daylight, but then the detail layer, right, of exactly how things went together to try to enhance the daylight reflecting in instead of all the shadow lines. And it was sort of a really informative process from the bottom of the house to the top. As we worked. It was like, oh yeah, I don't like that. Hey guys, can we do this way up here?
Time and materials.
What you can, totally. That's what you can do at home. Right. Do it with a client. So,
all right,
good learning.
We're gonna cut there.
All right.
Thank you for listening. Thank you, Will, for coming down.
Thank you.